Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and these are your sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of April 2020. Now, this particular grouping is for the earth signs Capricorn, Taurus, and Virgo. And I've been joking around saying, it's going to be really interesting making horoscopes this month since everyone's sort of stuck at home. So please leave your comments in the comments section this month because I'd really love to hear your stories and see how these transits play out for many people within the confines of their home. I just think it's like a really rare, interesting thing to observe astrologically. So I'd love your take. I'm just going with the themes that I think I'm just going to treat this like a regular horoscope and just be like, here, look, these are the themes. I still think they're going to be, prominent, even if we are stuck in our homes. So I'm just kind of going under that assumption. But how exactly they manifest, I think, is going to be really interesting. So I do hope that you'll participate and share that with me. Now, let's start with Capricorn. At the very beginning of the month, the transit that is perfecting to start the month is the conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. Let me give that a better drawing here. There you go. So Mercury and Neptune are getting together around 19 degrees of Pisces. That'll transpire between the 1st and the 6th, the first couple of days, especially Mercury applying to that conjunction. Now, it's in the house that's related to mind and communication, and we know that Mercury is related to the same topics. And so we can potentially look for a more emotionally porous kind of feeling from this transit. Um, Capricorn is a sign that's often talked about as very stoic, very earthy and solid and sort of Saturnine. But um, your whole sign third house is ruled by Jupiter and is water sign. And so, never underestimate the deeper emotions that Capricorns carry. And this month, you may find that you're not able to hold them back as much or that you shouldn't hold them back. At the same time, you want to be careful of the illusory quality of Mercury and Neptune, where we can very easily um, become deluded or develop fantasies about things that aren't necessarily real or true. Gossip can be an issue with Mercury and Neptune, or untruths or deception. Those would be some of the dark things to watch for. On the other hand, synchronicities, symbols, and dreams, and almost just an otherworldly level of information coming in or dialogue or conversation streaming in can be very inspired and even spiritual. So watch for that energy between the 1st and the 6th of the month. At the same time, at the very beginning of the month, Mars is conjoining with Saturn. And say the first 7 days of the month or so, Mars will conjoin with Saturn, and then immediately by the 7th go into a square with Uranus in the sign of Taurus. Now, first of all, with Mars and Saturn conjoining in your second house, that's the money house. Finances, resources, there might be some consolidation around those, around your resources or money. Par for the course for a lot of people right now. But it's a kind of a pressure cooker, Mars and Saturn, which can mean that you're working within limitations or constraints and yet doing so constructively to great effect. It can mean that you are having to sell something, or it can mean, again, that you are purging or even sort of trimming back or consolidating something. It could also mean that there's some kind of new project that you're working on. A lot of concentration, hard work, and the potential to be very productive anytime that Mars and Saturn get together. And that could translate into financial gain this month, even though I know for a lot of people that's probably not feasible. Still, Mars and Saturn in the second can do something productive around money and finances. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. And Mars square Uranus in the 5th house, which is traditionally called the house of good fortune, can also mean that there are creative breakthroughs related to money or finances. Or on the not so good side, more a negative side of things, Mars square Uranus can be about some kind of impulsive or reckless use of money. It could also mean some kind of unexpected expense or some kind of unexpected breakthrough or opportunity. But the unexpected nature related to finances will step up right around the 7th. Something kind of, Uranus usually brings the dramatic, the unexpected, the sudden, but oftentimes the providing breakthrough and liberation. So it doesn't have to be all bad. Now, from the 1st to 15th, Jupiter is conjoining with Pluto in your first house. And that's that's a game changer for Capricorns this month, because Pluto, Lord of expansion and growth and abundance, is conjoining the Lord of death, uh, depth, darkness, intensity, and rebirth in your first house, which is the most personal house. That can mean for some people, Capricorn rising, Capricorn sun will experience this as potentially some kind of hard reset. And you need to take care of your health this month if you're a Capricorn, because Jupiter's conjunction to Pluto, I mean, regardless of the coronavirus, just Jupiter's conjunction to Pluto can be rebirthing at its best, and sort of health, death, birth crisis at its worst. So, but also the idea of the expression of personal power and will, and being more aggressive or assertive. And, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It depends. It depends on how you are wielding power or strength right now. So think about that a little bit. First 15 days of the month, that's really intense in your first house. It can express itself through your personality and your ego and your will in the world, also in terms of health and body. On the 7th, you're going to see the full moon in Libra falling in your career house. There's emphasis on the full moon being about your career. There is some nice trines from Mars and Saturn and Venus, which could, kind of connects a little bit of a grand air trine feeling. In houses that are connected to work and productivity, that could be a very good thing, especially since the full moon is in the career house in Venus's sign. Venus is, of course, a fortunate planet of good fortune and pleasant things. Venus is in the 6th. Venus is surrounded by the malefics in an enclosure, but this is a grand trine we're talking about. So I get the feeling of something good happening, people entering your life, or some kind of social benefits that are helpful, and potentially some opportunities for growth or expansion of work and business, but maybe within certain kind of parameters, or having to work through certain kinds of restricted spaces or environments, like working at home could be indicated here. And I know that for a lot of people, this is like totally like, isn't that everyone? But it looks it looks like the full moon for Capricorns is going to be really dramatic around work, and potentially some positive, making the most out of a difficult situation is what I would call it, especially around work and money. And that's the full moon. So then if we go forward between the 13th and the 15th, you're going to see the sun in Aries starting to go through squares to Pluto and to Jupiter in your first house from the 4th house. That has the feeling of some pretty dynamic, action-oriented energy around the topics of home and family, and probably pretty personal for you, because this is connecting again to that Jupiter-Pluto dynamic in the first house. You want to be careful of the way you're wielding power in the home. This could be a more like, let me exert my will and dominate, but you could easily step on other people's toes. Or you could just be dealing with sort of turf wars in the home around this time. And some need to rise up and face challenges relative to the topics of parents, family karma, home and living environment. So that could step up quite a bit between about the 13th and the 15th. Then on April 19th, the sun is going to immediately square Saturn. This brings up the topic of money and finances again. Maybe it's in Taurus. And now we start a theme. And this theme is that really what we're going to see is the sun goes through the square to Saturn, right? And then eventually Mercury is going to go through the squares to Pluto and Jupiter and then Saturn. And then both planets are going to conjoin with Uranus. And on April 22nd, there's also a new moon in Taurus. So the new moon on the 22nd into the 23rd also emphasizes the planet Uranus. And all of this energy is square to Saturn. So I'm just going to simply summarize this for you. There's going to be a tension between kind of a creative breakthrough energy with Uranus in the 5th house of creative self-expression, let's say, and conservative Saturn, who's a little bit more locked down and restricted, dealing with malefic Mars as well in the second house of money and finances. So it's as though there's this kind of aura of like inventiveness, greater independence and freedom, innovation, sudden dramatic breakthroughs that free and liberate, especially creatively, or that just create happiness or good fortune. And then this much more difficult, conflicted Saturn energy around the house of money and finances. And that's basically the story from the new moon of April 22nd all the way through April 30th, when Mercury finally conjoins with Uranus. You can see Mercury's going to fly through here and eventually connect with Uranus as well. So that's just, it's reiterating the same themes over and over again the last, say, 8-9 days of the month. So expect some dynamic tension between those two areas. All right, so you have to let me know how it goes, Capricorns. Meanwhile, I'm going to fast forward and put Taurus rising on the ascendant. Let's wind it back and do it again. So at the start of the month, for all of you Taurus risings out there, the Mercury Neptune energy is taking place, coming together in your 11th house, which is the place of friends. So you're looking at that porous, mystical, boundaryless, mental, emotional energy within the house of groups and friends. Not a good time to pick up unwanted things from friends or groups. You especially think about the emphasis on immunity right now. Pisces as a sign is related to immunity. You want to be really careful about what you're picking up from people in groups around this time, the first 7 days of the month. I don't say that to scare anyone, but it's legit. Like, what it could simply be bad juju, right? But you're porous around groups of friends and people, and maybe a little bit susceptible to their influence physically, mentally, emotionally. So be careful of that. On the other hand, the same exact energy of Mercury and Neptune can bring healing and can bring connection emotionally that's really needed, or spiritual upliftment, or even creative inspiration with friends or within groups of people. Do be careful of gossip and deception as well. That's the the negative positive side of the 11th house. So just keep your discerning eye around. Now, between the 1st and the 6th, we're also going to see Mars and Saturn conjoined in your 10th house of career. It's a real pressure cooker. It can be very disciplined and focused and austere, hardworking, and very concentrated energy in the career house. But it can also speak to frustrations and limitations in the career area. So either working really hard at something and producing something like the crystallization of something through hard work and concentration, or you also think about the potential for constraints, Saturns, and frustrations, Mars, kind of mounting and having to deal with feeling a little stifled. A lot of people are feeling that way. For Taurus is really, it's coming into your 10th house. Can also be a time of really, like focused, hard, clear, work, and it, kind of crystallization of a lot of structured and disciplined work that you're doing. And not surprising in an air sign if it would be online either. All right. So that same energy of Mars is going to go right into a square with Uranus in your 5th house, or in your 1st house of Taurus, which means that there could be kind of a rebellious or forceful or aggressive energy coming through somewhere between your career and maybe people you're dealing with in the workplace, and within yourself. The 1st house is, of course, your own home house, and so Mars square Uranus is a question about how you are revolutionizing or changing who you are, the way you're doing work, or how you're changing in relationship to the workplace. And you're got a little bit more forceful, aggressive mode here. The desire to be free and independent could be really strong, so those are things to watch for. All right. So you can see it at the very beginning of the month that Jupiter conjoins Pluto, and that can be a crisis and transformation of faith, belief. If you have teachers, if you're studying something, it can point towards certain kinds of legal issues potentially, but it is a deep and very cleansing kind of transit potentially. You also have to be careful that the power of the higher mind isn't becoming overly domineering or strict, or kind of like a dark lord energy with Pluto. and Jupiter in the ninth house. Now, if we go forward to about the 7th of the month, that's all the first week of April. Go forward to about the 7th, and that's when we're going to get the full moon coming through in the sign of Libra. Now, that lands in your 6th house, opposite the sun in the 12th house. The need or desire to make peace is going to be really strong. The need or desire to lend help or aid or to receive it from others, because the full moon in Libra is a peacemaking sign, a harmonizing sign. It's the full moon is in the 6th house, which is traditionally a place of conflict and labor and strife, difficult house, but it's being disposed of by Venus, who's in the 2nd house of finances. So that's a fortunate dispositor for the most part. And Venus is also, seeing your 10th house and Mars and Saturn up there. So you get the feeling of this kind of grand air trine energy that there is a certain amount of resources and productivity and good fortune that's coming through, albeit, again, within certain constraints or confinement around money and work. But it's good news, I think, overall. I think something positive is developing here, even if you're in a bit of a pressure cooker, or even if it's somewhat frustrating, because we are dealing with Mars and Saturn in the career house for you this month, but the full moon in the 6th with Venus in the 2nd there should be some kind of resource here that's available for you to receive or even to give others that is uplifting. So watch for that around the full moon of the 7th. Now we go forward to the 13th to the 15th. And around that time, what you're going to see is the sun in Aries in your 12th house hitting squares to Pluto and Jupiter in the 9th. You want to be really careful about the explosiveness or volatility of beliefs, ideals, religious or spiritual convictions. It's possible that you are in a more combative headspace, or that you're dealing with people who are somehow attacking your beliefs or ideals, or that you're feeling like engaging with people in a more hostile way because of really strong beliefs and ideas that you have. On the other hand, there can also be some sense of looking at the ego and the faults and flaws of the ego relative to your beliefs. A lot of us talk a big game, but our ego constantly needs to be checked because we're not walking our talk. This is something that could check us if you're a Taurus rising and make us walk our talk. I say, probably that you could also see some revelation, some kind of the sun often represents revelations, and the 9th house is very spiritual and philosophical. The square to Pluto could be a kind of death and rebirth too, around your faith life, or just insights that you're having that somehow are very uplifting, even if they're a little heavy or dark, and there is a little bit of ego death involved. Now, right after that, the sun is going to go straight into the 1st house into a square with Saturn. You can see this happening right around the 20th. You see there's the square from the sun to Saturn. So there it's about identity and the power, again, of ego, but now it's coming into contact with Saturn in your career house. So there's something, towards the new moon, which comes in around this time on the 22nd. So this is a dark moon energy. You can see the moon is in Aries in the 12th house at the same time. Something about power and how you wield it in the world, the nature of your beliefs and how you express them, stepping up, becoming more bold, but also finding ways of doing so that are pleasant and pleasing and not combative. Hard work and the feeling of breakthrough, while also there being some pullback and more restrictive energy in the career house at the same time. So it wouldn't be surprising if you were feeling like personally you were on the verge of some really important breakthroughs, while also, sort of contending with the pullback of conservative Saturn in the career house. All right. So then on the 22nd, there is a new moon into the 23rd, new moon in Taurus. And the new moon in Taurus, of course, falls in your home sign in a conjunction with Uranus. And at this point, the rest of the month really tells the same story. You're going to see Mercury go through squares to Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, and then it conjoins with Uranus and Taurus. Same thing the new moon energy is doing. New moon in Taurus in the first house, square to Saturn, conjoined with Uranus. So what is this saying? Well, really what we're doing is we're talking about a period of time where there's almost like a translation of things that are happening in your mind, bigger ideas that are forming, bigger realizations that you're having, beliefs that are becoming really strong or dominant, and how to communicate them with the world or how to translate them into your work in ways that are still pleasing and likable and not too combative. That's one thing. On the other hand, there's some kind of breakthrough that you're experiencing personally starting at the end of April through late May. It's really big. It feels like a greater degree of independence and freedom is starting to come, but it is happening while Saturn in the career house is just demanding hard work, concentration, focus, maybe presenting constraints. So there's a push pull between those two energies from like the 22nd new moon in Taurus to the end of the month. That's what you're dealing with as a Taurus this month. Again, I'd love to hear, how everything is going. All right, let's wind it back and do it one more time for Virgos. All right, so we're going to put Virgo on the ascendant and start over. And you know what? At the beginning of the month, that same Mercury-Neptune dynamic is flying through your seventh house, which is the house of relationships. So that porous, otherworldly, potentially boundary dissolving Mercury-Neptune dynamic, that's in your house of love and relationships. So be careful of deception and fuzzy boundaries in your relationship, simple interpretation. But on the other hand, be open and available for deeper emotional surrender to come through others, for others to inspire your faith and devotion and love. And there's a real potential for emotional healing and connection with others during the first part of the month for you. But you also have to be careful, as always, about the fuzziness and the potential for confusion or overwhelm because of a lack of boundaries or some tendency to kind of, fly off the ground, and into the imaginal. So that's like the first to the seventh. Then at the same time, we see Mars and Saturn conjoined in your sixth. Now that's the place of work and labor. And, this speaks to the potential for there to be a degree of really hard work, of dealing with feeling confined and pent up, but forced to serve or forced to work, or of the potential to be working really hard and in the trenches. The sixth house is traditionally a place of disease, injury, illness, military, battles, strife. Mars Saturn there will meet it very constructively with a lot of courage and maturity. It's a potential that you're serving this month in some way. And you're going to need, in some ways, to take a big perspective, distance yourself from, obsessing about things, see the big picture, and stick to, a long-term, steady, persevering plan. Um, this transit is also by the seventh. Mars is also going to square Uranus in your ninth house of the higher mind, higher beliefs. There is also going to be the potential to want to enact your beliefs in the world and to feel impatient if you are being made to do things or deal with things that feel to you out of step ideologically or philosophically. You might rebel against that, especially right around the seventh. On the other hand, the connection between these two houses shows a commitment to steadily, slowly committing yourself to learning something that's maybe very unusual or even sort of eccentric, including Uranus in the ninth house, something like astrology. But anyway, let me know how that transit goes. I'd be curious to hear more about that one. Then Jupiter and Pluto are conjoining in Capricorn in your fifth house for the first half of April. And that energy is going to express itself in a house that has a lot to do with joy and pleasure. Virgos don't always have the easiest time accessing joy and pleasure. As a mercurial person, Mercury has a natural kind of antithesis with Venus in ancient astrology, which means that which is more mental and intellectual sometimes struggles to just get into the body and experience the sensual. There could be some kind of really deep transformation around your relationship to pleasure this month. maybe feeding into your religious and spiritual beliefs as well. But it's a good time to visit taboo and the unconscious in relation to pleasure, the arts, sex, and stuff like that. You want to be careful of the potential to get kind of taken over by darker and more ferocious impulses in this area. Like it could be easily a time to go overboard with something that's not very good for you. But otherwise, this has the feeling of something cathartic that could shift your relationship to pleasure, happiness, and creativity in a really positive way. All right. Um, now, then we go on to the full moon in Libra. And let's see. So go to the 7th for the full moon in Libra. Now, for Virgos, that's going to land in your second house, which is the house of money and finances. And now, overall, with Venus also showing up in your career house right now, that's pretty good. There are constraints definitely this month with Saturn and Mars in your sixth, not being able to work or confinement, or, it's like that's a real thing this month for everyone. I mean, it's not a joke that this month Venus, the sign of social harmony, is confined by the malefics all month, right? So, but the full moon in your financial house with the Venus in your career house should mean that there is some good fortune coming in for you this month around finances and work, despite the kind of enclosure of the malefics in the sixth, which could be, it could reduce it or make it more difficult or just frustrate it a little bit. But I still think something good is going to come through around money and work for you at the full moon. If we go forward from there, between the 13th and the 15th, you're going to see the sun in Aries in the 8th house going through squares to Jupiter, Pluto. You see the moon's actually triggering it around the 14th as well. And this is very dynamic, right between the 13th and the 15th. This is a death and rebirth of the ego, maybe especially again in relationship to pleasure and creativity. But it has this feeling of facing some of the shadows of ego, or maybe looking at the shadows of ego and the shadows of pleasure and even sex in relationships. This could also be, like, frankly, like it wouldn't be totally surprising to see people with the 5th house Pluto, Jupiter, like Virgos, with a few other things this month, for a few other signs where pregnancy is a possibility. That is possible. But this also has something to do with karmic debts or obligations, and what we owe other people or what other people owe us if you're a Virgo sun or Virgo rising. So, okay. Now, if we move forward again to the 19th, then we're going to start seeing a pattern. And this is what it is. I'll just show you. So first of all, you're going to see it with the sun. The sun enters your 9th house of the higher mind, and after having gone through the squares to Pluto and Jupiter, hits a square to Saturn in the 6th. Then it immediately goes into a conjunction with Uranus right here. Then the new moon on the 22nd is going to repeat the same theme, and you're going to see a new moon in square to Saturn from the 9th to the 6th. Then the exact same thing happens with Mercury between the 22nd and the 30th. Mercury goes through the squares to Pluto and Jupiter, and then immediately will go into Taurus, and by the 30th is in a conjunction with Uranus. This is all basically taking place between the 9th and the 6th. Now, what do I see there? Basically, if we just kind of highlight the new moon in the 9th house, we're talking about a breakthrough in your thinking, in your beliefs, in learning, in religion and spirituality, maybe something involving foreign countries, or something legal even. But it's a shift. It's a paradigm shift. Could mean that you're going to study something online. Astrology would come to mind with Uranus in the 9th as well. It could be that there's some kind of paradigm shift that's happening, or that your faith is being renewed or ignited or inspired in some way, or that your beliefs are really, really powerful and strong right now, and maybe even somewhat defiant or rebellious, that they're expressing themselves in that way. And they're hitting conservative Saturn in the sixth house, which says shape it, grow it over a long period of time. Like you're going to study, you realize that you're inspired, you're going to go back to school, or you realize that you're going to study something and you're getting really serious about it. That would fit. On the other hand, there's this feeling of having a breakthrough, but being constrained or confined by Saturn. And Saturn's agenda in the sixth house is more of a taskmaster. So while the mind is kind of exploding in the ninth, Saturn's pulling back from the sixth and saying, you can't do that, or you have to work, or you're limited in some way, or, and so there'll be a conversation between these two energies from about really the 19th of the month through the end of the month, the conservative tendencies of Saturn versus the paradigm changing properties of Uranus. And that's in the ninth house of the higher mind, and the sixth house of work, service, like slavery, even it was called. So it's a very intense energy toward the end of the month for Virgos. So that is what I have got for all of you earth signs. I hope that this was interesting, and I hope that you have a great month of April. I'd love to hear from you and hear how things go. Please leave me your stories in the comments section. You can check my monthly overview video for the complete list of transits. I try to narrow it down a little bit in my sun and rising sign horoscopes. So check that out for the month of April. I will be updating on all these transits throughout the month. There's tons of videos to make, so I'll look forward to sharing the adventure with you. And I hope you have a great month, and I look forward to seeing you again in May. Take it easy, everyone.